All right, welcome everybody. Hello, welcome. Is this thing on? It is on. Thank you, welcome. This is the November 19th regular school board meeting for the Edina School Board. I do call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum, and having called it to order, John, if you could just quickly review the agenda for everybody.
Yeah, first of all, I want to announce that Edina Public Schools tonight, this board meeting will be live streamed through YouTube Live. So for those yes, that's cool. Also want to welcome, do we have the AP government class here tonight? Or not AP, ninth grade government class. Is that right? All right. All of you raise your hands if you're from that class. All right. Okay. Welcome. There'll be a short quiz after the meeting that's worth 7,000 points to in your class, so stick around.
It's online.
And it's online, that's right. So tonight on the agenda, welcome everyone who's on YouTube Live, and welcome to our ninth grade government class. I'm sorry I called it AP, it's ninth grade. So tonight you'll approve the minutes from 5 other board meetings. We have recognition tonight of girls tennis team and boys cross country team, as well as recognition of the work done with the meal fund and Jerry's Foods in Edina. On consent, we have some personnel recommendations, some commendations, and acceptance of some gifts. Under the discussion, you'll hear some budget program recommendations, discussion on personalized learning goals, new course proposals and course changes. Legislative Action Committee will be presenting its legislative platform for discussion, and there will be policy updates. Several policies will be discussed. Under action, we will accept the world's best workforce goals, the bylaws of the Legislative Action Committee, and also approve policies that were discussed in the previous meeting. And then there's some information related to enrollments, demographics, and some more staff recognition and upcoming school board meetings. So with that, Chair Wallen Friedman, that's the agenda for tonight.
Great, thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the October 15th work session, the October 15th regular meeting, October 23rd work session, November 5th work session, and November 13th work session?
Second.
Any changes to the minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes from the October 15th work session, October 15th regular meeting, October 23rd work session, November 5th work session, and the November 13th work session, say aye.
Aye.
And it does sound like a lot of work sessions, by the way. Next, we move on to recognitions. The first recognition is of the girls' tennis team. I believe they have been here before.
Girls, come on up. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Troy Stein, and I'm the assistant principal and director of activities and athletics at the high school. And I'm proud to be here tonight to recognize our girls tennis team and also our boys cross country team. And we're going to start off with girls tennis. One of the things that is remarkable about all of our programs is we really strive hard to provide involvement, engagement, and opportunities for our student athletes to excel not only academically, athletically, but we want them to grow and be strong leaders. And along the way, sometimes we get some teams that excel beyond the normal scope. And so tonight we're recognizing state champion Edina girls tennis. And so thank you for coming tonight, ladies. What I'd like to do is just have you introduce yourself, give us your grade, and also something that was memorable from this fall, okay? And if you're a senior, let us know what your plans are for next year. Just pass it down.
I'm Anna McDonald. I am a senior, and my favorite part of the season is always the state tournament and how close the team is able to get during the tournament. My plans for next year are to be determined, but yeah.
I'm Shaylin Rieger. I'm a junior, and my most memorable part of the season was probably the Jim Jones tournament, where we played in 100-degree weather for hours, and almost everybody got sunburns.
My name is Jessica Ip, and I'm a junior, and I'd say my favorite part of the season was Fall We State, too. just for how fun it was.
My name is Andrea Jansen. I'm a senior. My favorite part was also state because we like good team bonding and of course when we won. My future plans, I'm playing tennis at North Dakota.
My name is Marissa Dulas. I'm going to be a senior. I am a senior, sorry. And my plans for next year include, well, they'll be determined in a little bit, I guess. And one of my favorite moments was going onto the court when our last player won state.
I'm Steve Paulson. I'm the coach. Like these girls, I love the state tournament. They seem to amp it up for the state tournament, play their best tennis during that time. Another one was Andrea here, who played the #1 player in the state in the region and won 6-3, 6-1. And I want to congratulate her as she finished second in the state singles competition, losing to her teammate, Nicole Copeland. So congrats to that, too.
All right, so on behalf of Edina Public Schools, we want to commend you on an outstanding season, and thank you for all you do for all of Edina, and the community is certainly proud of you. Can we give them a nice big round of applause? Let's slide over here a little bit, and we'll get a picture. We'll look that direction. All right. Thank you. Thanks for coming tonight. Let's bring up our boys cross country team. So we're extremely fortunate to have outstanding student athletes and coaches that are extremely dedicated and passionate for what they do. And with the last 15 or so years, this program has been so close to winning their first state championship that it was kind of a surprise to some of us when they actually won it this fall, that it was their first one, because they've been so close so long. So there's been a lot of people in the cross-country world that was like, really, that was their first one? So we're extremely proud of all of you. And I know that the alumni of this program are extremely passionate about it, and they're all proud of you for breaking that barrier and winning a first one for us. So again, congratulations to them right now. Again, I'd like you to introduce yourself and give us your name, your grade, if you're a senior, what your plans are for next year. But also, one thing that I'm curious of is when you're on these hard runs, and I know Coach Kirkpatrick really likes to push you guys, what are some of the things that goes through your mind that keeps you motivated to keep pressing through that? Okay, we'll start over here.
I'm Russell Gokemeyer, and I'm a junior. And whenever I'm on a hard run, I just like think about how I want to get better and just the races we have ahead and working to keep the team chem high.
My name's Lucas Selman. I'm a senior here. What I think about on my runs is how well we can improve as a team and how well we work well together, and that obviously correlates with our state championship this year.
Hi, my name is Gus Hubble. I'm a junior, and I kind of agree with what these last two guys said about how just run as a team. You know, just like, especially just like talking during the runs makes it go by a lot faster, and that just makes everything a lot easier.
I'm Max Manley. I'm going to run at Miami, Ohio next year. The thing I think about most on long runs is how much better this will help me, or how much more this will help me get better for future races, and just pushes all of us to keep going.
My name is Willem Gokemeyer. I'm a senior. My future plans are to be determined. But what I think about on a long run is that I have to do this or else Russell will be better than me. And that would be very difficult for me to handle.
Sean Baird. I'm a junior. And what I think about on long runs is I usually just let a song melody play through my head. Like the song Whip It was playing through my head for like a 10-mile run one time.
I'm Luke Jessen. I'm a senior. Either I'm distracted by Gus's long run-on sentences, or I like to tell myself it doesn't hurt yet, which isn't true, but there's always more to come.
I'm Jamie. I haven't done a long run in about 15 years, so I don't really remember. Next year, hopefully I'll be back coaching this crew again, or at least 3 of them. But in all seriousness, like I tried to kid these guys a little bit about like getting the shame off of our program from being one of the few that don't have state championships at Edina. It's few, just a few of us left, or one fewer now. But in all seriousness, it was a huge accomplishment, and it was really fun to see. One thing I do want to say, I don't know how, I'm sure people assume this, but I always like to point it out if I have a chance. I've served under, this is the 4th athletic director at Edina, and not knocking any of the previous athletic directors, but we are so supported by Troy and that office, and I know that is not, knowing a lot of my colleagues well, it's not the norm, and so just wanted to publicly thank Troy for all of his support of our program.
I'm going to have to give you a raise for that one. That's really good stuff. One of the things I want to, when I was talking to Jamie after he won it, that struck a chord with me, and I don't even know if you remember saying this, but he talked about how his pleasure in winning it wasn't a self-gratification. It was a feeling of fulfillment for all of the prior runners that worked so hard to build the program in his time here. And it's a testament to him and a lot of our coaches in their value with building relationships with our student athletes. And so it was really nice to hear that while he was gratified to win it, but it wasn't about him or the program, it was about all of the kids and the prior student athletes and the alumni that were part of it. So a tribute to you, and I want to thank all of you. And on behalf of the school district, we have a certificate. I'll give it to the coach here. And again, a big round of applause for our cross-country program. Hold that in the middle. There you go. It was Paul. All right, congratulations again, fellas. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Next, we have the Meal Fund and Jerry's Foods Edina. John, is that you?
It got started when these angel funds around the cities, just anonymously covering people's lunch accounts. But it started circulating around social media that people were doing that.
Like, say, seniors can donate their leftover money when they graduate to go towards this to help cover some students and families that are in need that may not qualify for free and reduced meals.
I'll get an email or a phone call saying there's a family in need. But again, it hasn't been enough. And so now we have a fundraising group coming forward to generate more dollars to help.
The Meal Fund was created by the community as a way to ease the burden of school meal expenses on families in times of crisis or instability.
Because even though we might not think about it, here in Edina we do have families with income issues, and this is a way we can help those families.
You can be doing great. You sign up your kids for a bunch of activities, everything's going great. Then a pink slip comes. Then a divorce happens.
Some families are turned away, and it's unfortunate to hear just by, $100 or $300 from their income, and that doesn't make lunches affordable or breakfast affordable for them.
I have definitely seen kids skip going up to the line and getting food because they know that when they put in their number and their information pops up on the screen that everyone can see who's standing in line, that there's going to be a negative number there.
So not eating during the school day is a huge problem for students because they have to concentrate on their schoolwork and their curriculum. Well, in order to concentrate, they really need to have the energy, and the nutrition provides that energy for students, essentially fuel for their brain.
If a child doesn't have to be thinking about the pain in their stomach, that they're hungry. One, they're better behaved, they have better attention spans, test scores go up.
If they're not getting anything in their stomach, then when they're in class, you can see on their faces, they're not paying attention. And sometimes you can hear their stomachs growling.
And we don't want income to be a barrier to that, as well as the social setting for our students just can come and eat. And we, the adults, can worry about the balances and the funding sources.
I want the people here to know we've got you. Not everyone is looking down on you if you're having a hard time.
If people can step up and help support, the meal fund, then I think they'll find some great satisfaction out of knowing that, they're helping to nourish children's bodies and minds, and they are our future.
I think it's so important that we let everyone else know about it so they can have the opportunity to contribute.
There are people in our district who really need the help. They're hardworking, they're doing the best they can, but they just aren't quite making it. I want my kids to know that if I have enough, then what I should be doing is helping those people around me to bring them up as well. Because the only thing that's going to happen if you bring the people around you up is you all go up together.
Kids having enough to eat, that matters to me.
Thanks. Thanks for humoring us through the video. We like to show that as much as we can. So tonight, is this mic on? Is this on? Yeah. Tonight we wanted to let you know that we'd love for you to accept a gift for the meal fund from Jerry's. Actually, all the customers at Jerry's for 6 weeks donated to the meal fund for 1,100 lunches for students, and the district runs about a negative $16,000 to $20,000 on meals a year, and we knew that we could fund it through the community, and the Jerry's partnership was just one step in that direction. So we wanted to present you with that check and let you know that there's more to come.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Great work.
Well, thank you to all the people who were recognized tonight. We do have a few teacher recognitions I would like to go through. There was a commendation of Paul Tesmer-Tuck, who was a 4th grade teacher at Creek Valley, and Krista Winkle, who was a media specialist at Creek Valley. There was an email from a parent that says, I wanted to take a minute to tell you how our child has been enjoying 4th grade the past month. She's really having a blast. I see a confidence in her, and these are the things that build confidence. Thank you for all that you and Mrs. Winkle are doing. Keep up the great work. And then there's a second commendation for Paul Tesmer-Tuck, who's still at 4th grade. I wanted to say thank you again for all that you do for our child and for your patience with him or her. We fully realize how much of a positive impact you are having. There was a commendation of the Cornelia teachers in an email to Principal Lisa Masika. I just wanted to send a quick note to say thank you for having such a great staff at Cornelia. There was a commendation of Principal Sean Dudley and the Valley View staff in an email from a veteran. On behalf of American veterans here in Minnesota and throughout the world, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for the magnificent Veterans Day 2018 program. It was splendid in every respect, an Academy Award performance if there ever was one. Students are fortunate to attend Valley View Middle School, and I want you and your entire staff to know how deeply grateful and appreciative we are that they are taught and coached by such a caring and thoughtful academic and leadership team. And there was a commendation of Kristen Powell, who is a 4th grade teacher at Creek Valley. I find that she is a very special individual who I believe truly sees the potential in every child. I just can't say enough positive things about how she cares, how she teaches, and how she shows up every day. So thank you to our teachers and to our staff. Next on our agenda is the community input. We do welcome community input at our meetings. We ask that you keep any presentation to 3 minutes or less. We ask that if you have complaints about individuals, that you bring those separately to the superintendent, or according to our policy, if you have a complaint against the teacher, you would go to that teacher or the principal at that school. So our first person tonight is Lucy Whitmer. Welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Good evening. My name is Lucy Whitmer. This summer I went on a life-changing research expedition to Fiji with the Edina High School Science Department. It consisted of 2 weeks of camping and no cell service. We spent time in a traditional village and at camps collecting data with scientists and studying different forms of life on the island. Before this experience, I had never really been out of North America. I had never really experienced a world different than my own, and traveling to Fiji definitely enhanced my perspective of other cultures and environmental issues as I experienced firsthand the wildlife and the people on the island. For me, this expedition lasted more than 2 weeks. To this day, the lessons and the lessons I learned and the people I had met stay with me. And immediately after this expedition, I, with other students on the trip, became increasingly involved in organizations and fundraisers to address environmental issues that are damaging beautiful environments such as Fiji. Project Earth, for example, is a club started by students on the Fiji expedition that raises awareness for the environmental issues within the Edina community, organizing fundraisers and campaigns for the use of clean energy, such as solar panels. Though I learned a great deal about the environment and wildlife on the expedition, one of the most memorable aspects of the trip was the people I met. In the few days we spent in the village, I was able to experience a culture in which lives are run not by technology, but by the community in which they live in. The villagers were the happiest people I've ever met. Even those that were unable to speak English, their bright smiles and loud laughs spoke for them. They treat one another like close family members and are not overwhelmed with the pressures of consumerism as they live so simply. Yet the immense work it takes for them to put food on the table and complete their everyday tasks made me and the other students reflect on how privileged our lives are in the U.S. In addition, through long bus rides, hikes, and evening campfire talks, I became extremely close with the other students, teachers, and even my principal, Mr. Beaton. I'm so lucky to have shared this expedition with so many dedicated and passionate members of the Edina community. Each of the scientists employed by OPWAL offered an incredible amount of knowledge in it also. Their dedication and experience in their field of science was absolutely inspiring. Each scientist came from a different part of the world and worked in a different field of study, but they all contributed a great sense of humor and a passion for their work at camp. As a student with a full, undiscovered life ahead of me, I look up to their ability to pursue what they love. As I grow older and eventually choose a career path, I hope to choose a field that I am truly passionate about, such as environmental science. I greatly recommend that the opportunity for OPWAL expeditions continue for upcoming years. My expedition to Fiji this summer opened my eyes and my heart to the irreplaceable beauty of this earth and its people. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Lindsay Smaka and Alison Bronwyn. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Lindsay Smaka, and I teach science at the high school. I was the coordinator of the travel-based learning experience to Fiji this past summer, and have proposed a similar travel-based learning experience to Borneo in 2020.
And I'm Alison Bronwyn. I teach biology and environmental studies at the high school. I was also thrilled to have this opportunity to be one of the science teachers to accompany them to Fiji this last summer. Tonight, we are presenting to you a few of our students who joined us on this trip. We're asking you to keep their thoughts and their emotions in your mind when you consider this trip to Borneo, as they're kind of the core of why we're doing these experiences. While on expedition in Fiji, the students spent the first week in the rainforest, studying various types of wildlife and the forest ecosystems. The second week, we moved down to the ocean's coast, and we learned about the fragile marine ecosystem and what we are doing both negatively and what we can do to help increase the livelihood of those ecosystems. With the help of our amazing students in Edina and one of the scientists, we were able to help the scientists gather the necessary data to formally and scientifically name a new species of the butterfly, the Papilio natewa. Additionally, the data that we collected is helping Fiji to establish a national park in the Natewa Peninsula. 2 years ago, I did a master's program in natural sciences and environmental education, and my final capstone paper was about the field experiences and the impact it has on students. The lessons learned while being fully immersed in nature and the environment are especially impactful for today's children, who oftentimes don't put their devices down long enough to appreciate the outdoors. Following a field experience, I had the students surveyed, and they noted a personal growth in their confidence levels, a better understanding of scientific concepts, and a deeper appreciation for the choices that they make, both locally and how it can impact ecosystems globally.
I am currently very fortunate in the middle of my best professional development I've ever had in my life, which is the Teachers for Global Classrooms program through the Fulbright program. One overlying theme through the course that I've learned so far is the concept of think global, act local. I've learned skills and tools as to how students can study other parts of the world, learn and gather ideas, and then tackle a local issue in their hometown or home state. As educators, we can get creative in our classroom to open our students' eyes to other parts of the world. But no matter how creative and innovative we are as teachers, within those 4 classroom walls, nothing can compare to seeing it with your own eyes. Nothing in a classroom could compare to being on trail with a world-renowned butterfly scientist, as we were so lucky to do so. As he shared his life experiences with the students, they were enthralled and so completely engaged in the moment. We were on a butterfly survey for a few hours without much luck. The scientist asked if the students wanted to head back to camp and rest, or if they wanted to keep going. Our enthusiastic, hardworking Edina students wanted to keep going and looking for butterflies. He said this was the first group he had ever had who wanted to keep going. I was so incredibly proud of them. Because we kept going on trail, we ran into what we had been hoping for, the new species of butterfly. We had found the nesting place of this butterfly and even had a sighting. The students took extreme pride in this discovery and were in awe of what they had just accomplished. Students can learn about another culture in the classroom, study it, watch videos, even Skype abroad. However, nothing in a classroom could compare to actually setting foot in a traditional Fijian village and really getting to know the people. Students met families who live on $15 per week and have so little from our perspective. From the Fijian perspective, they had everything they need: a farm to grow all of their food, the ocean to provide fish, a village with their own church, and a strong sense of community. I watched as our Edina students dove into the experience, spending hours with the village children, hunting coconuts and learning how they use every part of the fruit as they made an underground oven for dinner. Students' eyes were open to a new world perspective different from their own, something that can only be done immersed in another country. This experience didn't only last the 2 weeks while we were on expedition. Students worked hard their whole junior year preparing for this journey. After return, students reflected and were able to use this experience to tackle issues at a local level. I'm so proud that they were able to do this independently before I even learned about this concept through my Fulbright. This experience will last their lifetime. I hope to continue with this program because of its many benefits, including the hands-on science, the mental health benefits, new world perspectives, the learning tools gained, exposure to potential career paths, and the list goes on. If you have any other questions or would like to discuss further, I'm more than happy to share more about this experience and the amazing benefits of travel-based learning. I hope Edina can continue to be a leader in global competency, which is one of our core educational competencies. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Anna McDonald. Welcome.
Hello everyone, my name is Anna McDonald and I am here to also talk about the absolutely life-changing trip to Fiji that I was able to take with some of my classmates and teachers this past summer. During this trip, we were fortunate enough to stay in a village as well as spend a large portion of our time camping and studying with amazing scientists from various places around the world at both a forest and marine camp. Like some of the other people in our group, this was my first time out of the country, and I could not have imagined a better way to immerse myself in other cultures and unbelievable experiences. This trip not only allowed me to grow my knowledge, but it also completely changed my view on the world and certain issues that could greatly impact our future. I've always been extremely interested in science and nature, and this trip allowed me to do things in these categories that I would not have been able to do anywhere else in the world, and especially in a classroom. This trip allowed us to experience things that we talk about in school firsthand and have hands-on experiences through the guidance of the scientists. One of my favorite parts of the trip was the time that we spent at the forest camp, where we did work with butterflies, birds, mammals, bats, the forest, etc., over the course of a full week. During this time, our group was lucky enough to help with several extremely amazing scientific discoveries, such as finding more specimens of a brand new species of swallowtail butterfly, discovered only last year and native to this specific area in Fiji, as well as gaining data and helping to find one of 4 known nests on the peninsula of the silk-tail bird, also native to this peninsula. During our trip, we were also given many lectures by the scientists that carried our learning even further. These lectures were so different and in many ways so much more interesting than anything I see in school because they pertain to animals and problems that we were seeing everywhere around us and that we were able to go out and study the next day. The scientists were able to make our learning so captivating and brought so much knowledge and humor into our time both on and off of trail. During these lectures in our open-air classrooms, it didn't feel like we were being taught or forced into listening, but instead we were all extremely interested and wanting to learn as much as possible about our surroundings during our short time there. Our trip was truly one of the most incredible experiences of my life, and I will continue to miss my time in Fiji, surrounded by the beauty and the wonder of the environment and nature, as well as the many relationships that I formed with the wonderful people there. I also hope to take all of the knowledge that I gained on this trip into my future education paths. I greatly urge that the OPWAL expeditions continue so that the future students at Edina High School are also able to participate in an experience like this that they will remember for the rest of their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Siobhan White. Welcome.
I want to go on an aqua expedition now.
Go back to school.
I know. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but I saw that personalized learning is up for discussion and future vote, and I wanted to share what I have observed on the Southview PL tour and from my own children's experiences. I currently have a 6th grader at Southview and a 3rd grade daughter at Normandale. First, I wanted to say that if personalized learning means that a teacher is meeting every child's needs, where the child is in terms of readiness and ability, and delivering curriculum to help each child meet and exceed their growth targets, I'm all for it. That is good teaching. But I don't feel that PL, as it stands today, is meeting all the needs of gifted and advanced learners. One of the concerns from gifted parents like myself is that the administration is against grouping children based on ability and providing classes at different levels of rigor, and that PL is an attempt to make heterogeneous classrooms appear to work for all students. The current PL structure does not group the kids by readiness or ability. Students are taught curriculum that aligns with the state standards. Students may take a test when they're ready, then they flex out and work on their own research until the rest of the class catches up and everyone can move forward to the next unit. There's no acceleration, differentiated curriculum, or direct instruction for students who have mastered the material. So, is the desire for heterogeneous classrooms the driver for PL? Would students who are currently finishing their work early and doing various self-study projects in a flex space be better served if they were in a separate classroom getting direct instruction at their level from a teacher? Would these students learn more if they were in a class with academic peers where the expectations were higher? If some students are always finishing their work faster, passing tests earlier, and choosing to flex out of the classroom to work on independent projects, then perhaps they're not in the correct level class. We keep hearing about how the old style of teaching is boring with a teacher droning on in front of a classroom filled with rows of desks. The PL coaches and administration say that PL offers a chance for students to get out of this boring classroom and do their own learning. But wouldn't a better solution be to have an engaging classroom where students want to stay because the pace and level were right for them? That could happen if we had classes of different rigor levels for all the core subjects, just as we currently have for math. In 6th grade, your child can be in 6th grade math, pre-algebra, or algebra. It wouldn't make sense to group these 3 levels of kids in the same heterogeneous classroom. However, kids who are in GT reading and reading well above grade level are in a standard language arts class where they're reading books that are at grade level. Some students are still working on formative skills like writing a paragraph and using proper punctuation, while others are capable of discussing more complicated literary devices and can write longer papers. Why are they all grouped in the same classroom? As for my kids, my son told me he didn't want to flex out and do a research question, known as a depth of knowledge, DOK, in social studies, even if he tests out of the unit early. He prefers direct instruction from his teacher, but in this class, the teacher's seminars are for kids who need extra help. He finds some of the classroom assignments to be too easy and the pace of the class too slow. My daughter just complained today after school that she is ready to move ahead on her writing project, but was told she had to wait until everyone was ready. She also dislikes being told to help other kids when she's finished her own work. She would prefer to have more challenging classwork that took more time to complete. I think we can do better for our kids. My hope is that with the new strategic plan, the administration will create a pathway for advanced learners in grades 6 through 8 in language arts, science, and social studies, just as we have for math. Teachers will have fewer levels of kids to teach, and the teacher's time will be less divided. All kids will have more direct instruction from the teacher and will have curriculum and assignments geared to the rigor level they are ready for. The pacing will match the group. Teachers will get to know their students better as they spend more time with them in the classroom, and will still be able to provide students with a choice and voice in classroom activities, assignments, and projects. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next is Nicole Danielson. Welcome back.
Thank you. And I have Sonia along with me. I didn't write that on the form. Hi, we're Nicole and Sonia, and we're here tonight on behalf of the Dyslexia Parent Alliance of Edina. We understand that this evening you will be discussing the results of the world's best workforce. After seeing the report, we have great concern regarding the decline in 3rd grade reading proficiency. As we discussed the last time our group was here, if a student is not reading at grade level at the start of 3rd grade, there is only a 25% chance they will ever catch up. What does that mean for the 30% of our students who fell in the category of not proficient? There was a 7.5-point decrease from the previous year in MCA reading proficiency, and from our understanding, this is the lowest level Edina has recorded since the testing began in this format in 2013. We've heard mention of an implementation dip as the explanation as to why this has occurred. By comparison, there is a Twin Cities school that partnered with Groves Academy to revise and enhance their reading program, and they saw students make 1.43 academic years of growth in 1 year. This is significant as 90% of those students were on free and reduced lunches. Our district has focused on balanced literacy. Researchers understand how human brains learn to read. We need systematic, explicit instruction in phonemic awareness and phonics, coupled with teaching children how to apply this to reading and writing. Balanced literacy does not provide enough of that. We previously recommended the APM report, Hard Words, Why Aren't Kids Being Taught to Read? We once again strongly suggest you take a listen. Our recommendation is to use the resources we have locally at hand. John Alexander at Groves is an expert on reading. He gave presentations to our group twice last spring and has offered to share his expertise as it pertains to how to teach children to read. The Minnetonka District has partnered with Groves and has had great success with their reading program. Their teachers are seeing results and it is changing the culture. We suggest Edina consider something similar because Groves has experience improving reading at all ability levels. While we were thrilled to have some teachers go through Orton-Gillingham training last year, maybe the solution extends beyond one single day of training to a fully inclusive program that includes on-site mentoring and coaching and impacts every child in every classroom. Speaking of Groves, there are more Edina students attending school there than from any other neighboring district. We hate to see families leaving due to reading needs, but it's a common theme we hear in our group. The world's best workforce results are serious and discouraging. We ask that our schools move to a reading and spelling curriculum and interventions that are evidence-based and delivered consistently. Without that, we fear these results will continue to move in the wrong direction. As you know, these are not just numbers and statistics. These are children who aren't learning how to read proficiently. There are many mental health and academic risks associated with being in that category. For the sake of these children, we need to see the trend shift in the other direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Noah Fransky. Welcome.
How you doing? After hearing so many of my students speak already tonight, I'm kind of intimidated. They're pretty articulate and awesome. My name is Noah Fransky. I'm a math teacher at the high school. I teach calculus and pre-calculus. When people ask me how long I've been at Edina, it's a complicated question because I graduated there in 2006. So I'm here partly just to talk about some of the great things that are happening right now at Edina and also some of the changes I've seen since I graduated. I grew up at the bottom of the sledding hill at Countryside School. I walked to school for elementary school, and then I attended Valley View, where we heard some great things are happening as well. And I also attended Edina High School, where I learned calculus in the room where I now teach it, which is pretty crazy. Other things I do at Edina besides teaching math, I'm one of the link crew coordinators. I also coach the math team. I'm also one of the coaches for our all-state math team that just got back from a national trip to Princeton. And things are going really well. So math team, we've been here before to talk about our state tournament appearances. That was the last time I was here. We have another great team this year. Our next meet is coming up next Monday. Some of the great things that are going on. You might wonder about this fantastic facial hair I'm sporting today. Lindsay Smaka, who you already heard from, is planning the upcoming science trip that we're going to have in the spring to the Galapagos. And she found a group of us at the beginning of the year that she thought looked like could maybe grow a beard. And they decided to have 14 of us. The kids voted on what kind of a design they wanted us to shave into our beards. And today was Revelation Day. And having lived in Ecuador myself, I was really excited having a jungle immersion experience myself. I was thinking this is such a cool opportunity for kids, and I jumped at the chance to grow out my beard and to be able to carve what turned out to be the Batman logo into my face. And I chose to speak tonight in no small part because I wanted the word bat stash in the meeting minutes for an Edina School Board meeting. So really excited that the students are going to have this awesome opportunity. I posted it on social media, and immediately Edina grads my age and also Edina grads that have recently graduated from Edina High School were sending me money on Venmo to make sure that the Batman logo ended up on my face. And we ended up raising a ton of money, and what Lindsay and Allison are doing with that program is absolutely spectacular. The whole science department is just a huge advocate for what's happening with our kids, which is really cool. A few other things I wanted to talk about. Really cool that Jerry's is here tonight. I remember right after I got my driver's license, it was always, hey Mom, anything you need me to pick up at Jerry's? Let me just drive up Tracy and see what I can find. And I now hold study sessions at the Jerry's right by the Starbucks in the front. They added that little kind of area with the tables. And don't tell the kids this, but I'm just the bait. I want them to get there and see them study together. And the way that they work together and the way that they create math in that space is just a brilliant thing to see the night before a test, sometimes till 10, 11 at night. And at that point, I'm just like, go to sleep. It'll be better. Other things that are going on. When I was in high school, I told you I learned calculus in the room where I am. One thing that is really encouraging is every year seeing the diversity numbers rise in our AP classes. It is so encouraging and so incredible because all I hear about is in other districts, some friends of mine that are teachers is tracking kids, and it appears to be based on racial lines. And it's so cool that in Edina, it seems that we're resisting that because I'm seeing more and more in my AP classes that I'm seeing a more broad range of students, which is something that's really cool. So really, to sum it up, there are good things happening at the high school, and we want to thank you for your continued support of teachers. We've got a lot of them here tonight, and I want to tell you, when we're at our best, there's no one better. There really isn't. And so thank you for letting us teach kids. We really do have kids' best interests at heart, and we hope that you do too. So thank you so much for supporting us. We really appreciate it. So thank you for all the great things you're letting happen at the high school. So thank you.
Thank you. That completes hearing from members of the audience. Tonight we did not have a 6:30 Q&A, but before board meetings, we typically do have a 6:30 Q&A where people can submit questions 1 week in advance and have more of a discussion atmosphere. For our normal presentations at 7 o'clock, the board and the administration listens, and then we'll provide feedback to those individuals after the meeting. We're moving on to the consent agenda. Are there any items to remove from the consent agenda? Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. We are on to discussion items. The first discussion item is budget, secondary program recommendations.
So I'm going to ask Randy and Margot to participate in this presentation. The principal's scheduling this week is challenging, so three of us are going to present this very briefly because the board has had 2 work sessions on these program recommendations. And as we look at meeting our budget targets for our secondaries of $350,000 reduction and $300 at the middle school, $300,000 at the high school. We're forwarding the recommendations that you've talked about with our principals in the past that are in 5 different areas. One is to schedule elective sections, those elective sections with higher enrollment than they currently are. And the second one is the exploratory section, especially at the middle school with higher enrollment. And also to reduce or figure out how we reduce or eliminate or schedule differently the low incident enrollment courses. Also to increase teaching responsibility of coaches and non-student contact positions that are currently working with teachers and kids in the building. And then with any sort of budget reduction, increasing class size, of course, always builds efficiency into the system, but also keeping it within the enrollment class size guidelines that we use here in Edina. So those are the 5 areas. You've talked about those with the secondary principals in the past. They'll be back here for December 6th final approval. And questions that we can't answer tonight, we'll forward to them, make sure they're answered when we return on the 17th for approval. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Anything you want to add, Randy or Margot? Okay.
Any questions? I believe Amir?
Well, just to emphasize some of the discussion we had previously at the work session, the high school leadership, the middle school leadership, and district leadership has found a lot of ways to try to minimize the impact of these concerns about low enrollment. And one of them is if a student is interested in a very advanced class that can be put in with other lower level classes along the lines of a studio art or top level language or music, they can still be in their room and continue to work on their own depth, that would be a workaround. So it wouldn't just say, you don't have this class, why don't you take something completely different, but we're going to find you a way to get the experience in the subject that you want. And I think that was a quality workaround. Another idea was to try to consider every other year for some low enrollment courses that tend to not run any year, to say if this is an amazing opportunity but we'd never get enough students to do it, what if we only offer it your 10th grade and 12th grade years, or your 9th grade and 11th grade years, so that students might bunch up enough in their 11th, 12th grade years to actually make this thing happen. And it just took a little bit of forethought and planning on the district side. And I think that made a lot of sense to us. They talked about having a course run if it was somewhat lower numbers, but then other courses in that same department, maybe an earlier math class or an earlier English class would take on the extra numbers of students. So they would have a class size that was slightly bigger so that one teacher could free up an hour to teach a more difficult but lower enrollment course later in the day. So that was a high quality option. The board made a distinction, maybe not uniformly, but in the conversation about the difference between canceling a lower enrollment course that was along the periphery of all of the subjects and opportunities at the high school versus more of a top rung, something that students had been striving for, and maybe not even every district offers it, but more of an AP type course, not to be extra cautious before we ever remove a top rung type opportunity. And I think there were maybe some other workarounds. Do you guys have anything more to add from that conversation?
I think that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah.
Are there any questions?
In general, I thought the cuts that the secondary principals provided, I thought were very thoughtful, looking at enrollment, working within departments, particularly at the high school, because the cuts that we're taking a look at this year are significant, to say the least. So I was very appreciative of the thought that they put into it, and I think these type of tightenings that will tighten up our budget in the secondary will not be as damaging as maybe other areas in terms of being able to address these and work with our enrollment numbers. But bearing in mind that enrollment is something that a district is constantly dealing with, and we're going to have to make sure that when kids and parents are looking at what they're wanting to enroll for the next year, that we have a real serious thought about that, so that teachers and administrators have time to plan those courses, because making changes at the last minute and trying to adjust enrollment is very difficult for our administrators and staff. So we need to continue to work with our kids and help them make the 4-year plans that they do make now. When they register for freshman year and they put their whole 4-year plan in, so that they can see where they're going and make a plan for the future, so that it'll help our administrators and our staffing to be in line with what those plans are, so that we're not, running into shortfalls at the last minute because we're trying to change things.
Great. Thank you. All right, this will be back in December for action. With that, we are going to move on to the personalized learning goals. Thank you, Margot and Randy. Your input was great.
You're welcome.
I offered for Margot to stay up at the table, but she politely declined. Good evening, Board Chair Wallen Friedman, Superintendent Schultz, board members, community members, teachers, and 9th grade government students. What you heard earlier this evening at the National Merit Recognition was unbelievable connections between teachers and students. And that really is the goal, right? I mean, that's why we're here, is if we can connect with kids and keep them engaged in high levels, they're gonna learn as much as possible in the time that we have them. And that really is the goal. And oftentimes you hear this phrase that there's an art and science of teaching. The art is really difficult to teach. It's really difficult to teach people the art of teaching. It's inherent in some personalities more so than others. But there's a lot we can do to teach the science of teaching. And by the science of teaching, we're talking about what are those very practical things that great teachers do that we can replicate across the system. Our work around personalization is to replicate those amazing things that great teachers do. You got to hear many stories tonight about them. To kind of summarize, I would say the first one is that they connect. They connect with their learners. The reason that they connect with the learners is because they take the time to get to know them. And they understand, great teachers understand how critical that is to students being able to learn. And so connecting with learners, can that be taught? The answer is yes, it can. And there's a structure to do it. We call that a learner profile inside of the model, but that learner profile is really geared at how do you formally set up a structure that drives those relationships to a deeper level. There was a second point that was made by many of the students, and that is that these teachers make it very interesting and engaging. And we know that when you look at national data, engagement declines through secondary school systems from 6th grade down to 11th grade, and then it starts to peak up again as students are getting ready to emerge into the world after high school. And so the question is, can you teach the science around how to make school more engaging? And there's a lot of evidence for doing that. So we want that to be part of the model as well. And I would say the last part is, many of the students spoke to this tonight. This teacher taught me how to be a learner, because in life, they're going to learn, unlearn, and relearn many, many, many times over. And so their student agency, their empowerment around learning is going to be a critical success factor for them moving forward. So to reiterate, to connect, to make it engaging, and to teach me how to be a learner. Well, that is really an interesting story, because I believe that parallels the 3 core elements that we are trying to embed in this personalization model. And the way that we get after that is by setting some goals, setting some action steps, and then monitoring our progress around that. We are a learning institution. We learn by doing. And so that doesn't mean that everything is perfect. We learn as we go. And that's what educational institutions do. In the board report, I've listed 5 goals, short-term and long-term. The first one was to increase clarity around personalization, the model, some common language. We've been working on that in our personalized learning design team, which is representative of elementary, early childhood, middle school, and high school staff, teachers and administrators. Our second goal was to begin to train staff more robustly around some core elements around personalized learning. We began some of that actually last year and are continuing it this year. We'll continue it on some of in our staff meetings and our district in-service days. And part of the role of the design team is to create a personalized learning continuum that we can use to collect data on where staff are at on some of these processes that we're talking about. But training is going to be ongoing, and it's going to continue with staff. We anticipate we'll be done with the core element training by the fall of 2021. Goal 3 was around advancing PL experiences for students at each of the levels. And through the design team work, we have teams at elementary, middle school, and high school that are building roadmaps on how they advance this at each of the levels. And part of those roadmaps include planning next steps, site visits, training, walkthroughs, better together observations, which are teachers getting around to other teacher classrooms, after-school learning sessions, modeling, action research, conferences. Then we have goal number 4, which is to generate some outward-facing measures of success. And I know we've previously had conversations with our school board about, well, how do you report to the community on the impact of that? And we do have a measures of success work group that's looking at outward-facing metrics, but we do have internal data that we are paying attention to. We have perception data. We are looking at achievement data. And just as an example, some of the questions that we asked staff and students and parents last year included whether the experience is personalized. I know what I need to learn, which is a great assessment of where a student is at in the curriculum. Are they even aware of what the learning outcomes are? My teacher knows my strengths and challenges. Those are one of the ways that we push deeper into building connections and relationships. I can decide how to show my learning, so do they have some voice in how they're going to demonstrate that learning, which is about engagement. I feel challenged. The idea that we have a rigorous learning environment for all of our kids is critical. That pacing meets my needs. Are we going too slow? Are we going fast enough? Is this working for you? I get personalized feedback from my teacher. These are some of the survey questions that we ask staff. Now, what I can share with you is that the results of those survey questions are higher in our schools that are most advanced in moving personalization. And I think that's really promising data. Now, the next story to tell is how's it affecting achievement? And we're not able to tell that story yet, but we will in the future. So I'll just add the last one was to keep our community well informed around progress on this, and we had a plan to bring forward personalization examples last spring with elementary and middle school and high school and bring those to board presentations. We will continue to share articles of success and stories, and we will continue to have dialogues with the community and the school board about how do we continue to do this in a way that meets the strategic plan for this school district. So that was a brief overview. At this point, I will stop and see what questions the board has and what we can answer and what we can take back to our team. Thank you.
One thing hits me right away. which is that there's a lot that I like about personalized learning. Randy, you just spoke a moment ago about the learner profile. I think that's a fantastic tool to, all kids are not the same. We don't have cookie cutters. And the learner profile is an attempt to understand what the student is like and tailor that to the student's experience. I think that's a wonderful intention and execution on much of that. But I have a certain level of reluctance about, it seems that we're not doing much ability grouping, and I've heard from the community, and I sense it myself too, that personalized learning might be enhanced by having ability grouping in courses beyond just math, science, social studies. And could you persuade me, work with me, so I can understand the case for why not to differentiate by ability, by readiness in those particular subject areas? Because I wonder if we could have that as well as personalized learning, that they don't have to be necessarily mutually exclusive.
Well, I think first of all, I don't personally like the word looking at ability grouping, because you can never really know a child's ability. You can only know their past and current performance. But I will say that in terms of differentiation is happening in classrooms, and it does happen with teachers. And it is a very difficult thing to do, but it's something that our master teachers do very well. In terms of the structure of courses, we're going to talk about that on the 6th and the proposal for how we structure courses moving forward. But I would also say that flexible grouping based on students' readiness and where they're at with their learning, where they're at with their standards, that is a critical element and a critical structure that we need to have in place in courses in school. So I think some of it is there's confusion over the terminology. I would argue for wherever a student is at with their readiness, wherever they're at with their standards, their performance, their competencies, we want to meet them where we're at and take them to the next level in challenging ways. Now, can that happen inside of a classroom with a diverse range of students? Yes, it can. There are structures that will support that. In fact, our teachers are doing that every day. The question is to figure out how to, where you need to organize students based on their readiness, and where you're going to keep students together for that particular content or that particular subject area. But what I would offer is that we will be talking in more depth about that secondary course framework design on the 6th, and we will bring to you some of our learning from other districts and how they've done that work, and some ideas for how we can move that forward in a way that maybe the board feels like it's better meeting the needs of kids across the system.
Thank you. I have talked to teachers myself who are very enthusiastic about personalized learning and believe that they can meet the needs of a wide range of students within a class. I've also heard the opposite too. And I'd be interested if there were some sort of anonymous way to find out what teachers really feel about that. And I have to relate from my own classroom experience. I taught standard computer instruction for 18 years, and I would have any number of levels within my classes, and I found it difficult to have a laggard with somebody who knew exactly what they're talking about and is on pace with the course. And the course tended to then go down to the lowest level of the ability in the class. And so I project that into our environment, and I wonder how a teacher can do that. We have miracle workers, yes, but still they're human, and I would think it's difficult. So I'm deliberating this. I'm still thinking a lot about it, and I'm not entirely persuaded that we're not missing something by not differentiating within the grade levels. So I think that's where my head is at, and I look forward to talking more about this in December at the December 6th meeting.
I don't have necessarily feedback on any of the particular tactics that you put forth. I would just like to suggest as a board that I think we need to talk about personalized learning at a higher, more strategic level and in a broader context. And you actually brought it up a little bit of what I was going to talk about, Owen. But we keep having these conversations in silos about things such as personalized learning. And then we'll have a meeting about gifted education. And then we also have people that desperately want help for learning disabilities. But we never discuss all of these things together and how they impact each other. And to me, the overarching question that we need to talk about as a board is curriculum delivery and interventions, and what we feel is the best strategic approach and what we can realistically afford to do as a school district. And I'm really uncomfortable signing off and saying that I want to move forward with these goals and suggestions without really understanding how they impact our ability to get other things done. For example, if we ask John and Randy to implement what is asked here, does that make us unable to do other priorities? Are you going to be spending, I mean, we have one teaching and learn, I mean, basically we have a department of one. Is it going to take 50 to 75% of your time to do this? And because we never have that overarching, broader discussion. And I think from a board perspective, we would be a lot more efficient and we would make better strategic decisions if we could house these in a larger discussion. I mean, to what you were talking about, Owen, you were like, well, how does this impact sort of the gifted thing? But we never talk about those things together. And so, not that it's not worthwhile to talk about, I actually really like the recommendations you came up with, Randy, but I would like to pull back and take those and then take the discussion we're supposed to have on the 9th and take into consideration the fact that we need help for kids that have learning disabilities in elementary school and try to figure out what does this mean from a holistic perspective for our school district? How do we prioritize the limited resources that we have to get us the biggest bang for our buck for the learners in our district?
And just on the note of resources, particularly since, the first presentation that we did, which was, secondary budget adjustments that we're having to make, and we haven't even gotten to the point yet where we've heard back from our 6 elementary principals regarding how they're going to handle the proposed amount that they're supposed to cut this year. And those cuts, I do think, will actually be potentially very devastating to the elementary curriculum. So I think my point being to your comment about resources and where we're putting them, I think, again, big picture, these are things we need to be talking about and where we're allocating dollars, because we are going to have to be a lot more careful about that as we continue to either be in deficit or being short what we need. So I think, to your point, bigger, larger discussions that are globally looking at how multiple programs are affected, and that goes to whether it's budget, personalized learning, all of the different things that we're doing, because we need to keep all kids in mind at all the different levels. And, to your question earlier, Owen, I too would find it interesting just to hear from teachers at different levels, some of their feedback on handling multiple kids in a classroom in terms of the different levels. Because how is it difficult? Is it challenging? And to the comment about seminar that we heard tonight too, I worry sometimes that, because I hear from my middle schooler as well, that sometimes seminar is considered just for the kids who choose that. But I don't want us to be limiting kids based on, well, you can go here, you can go here, you can go there. And so they may not be taking advantage of things that they need to take advantage of, or just that loss of a teacher feeling like, well, I need to use my seminar time to help the kids who aren't at the place where they need to be. So I don't want to constrain our teachers, I guess, is part of what I'm saying. If we hear that that's very difficult to work in that model and have all the different levels in one classroom, what can we do to support that better? And, and look at best practices. And I know personalized learning has gotten entangled with whether it's GT or other discussions. And so broadening it and figuring out, what is best practice, what are the best models that we can use, and are we supporting our teachers, and what input do they have on these various models.
So Erica, this is set for discussion this month, action next month. Are you suggesting that we table any action until we get further in the strategic plan?
I don't necessarily know if it needs to be part of the strategic plan per se, but I think that we need to, I guess, not back up, but I think like as opposed to having this move forward is to take this out of this meeting. And when we're talking about, for example, the gifted recommendations, is to morph that into a meeting where it's a larger discussion about what do we need to do from a learning strategy perspective, given the constraints that we have on our district right now, and talk about personalized learning and talk about how personalized learning affects the gifted and talented, and how that affects our ability to do things for the third grade reading program and the kids that have learning disabilities, and how all of these things impact each other, and we never talk about them together. And that's the discussion I want to have, because until we have that discussion, I'm fearful of saying, this is great, Randy, go forward with it, and then finding out 2 months from now, oh, we don't have any resources for anything else. And not that that's the case, and like I said, Randy, I don't want you to think it has anything, I actually really like the work that you put forth here. So it has nothing to do with anything you've put forth. I think as a board, we need to back it up 10,000 feet and talk about this from a more strategic perspective.
Well, one thing, Erica, that you just hit, I was struck with that you said that the word holistic. And it just occurred to me, yeah, that's true. We've got a patchwork. This is kind of a part of the patchwork, and we inherited as a legacy artifact of the previous strategic plan, personalized learning. And so we haven't taken it upon ourselves to evaluate, do we want that yet for the strategic plan? And where does it fit holistically with intervention strategies for dyslexic kids, for autistic kids, for our gifted and talented population? Where does this fit into the larger whole? And everything cascades down from our values, and so does this fit into that? And if it does, how does it? And so I agree that I don't think we've really thought through where does this fit coherently into the direction that we're pursuing. And, like I say, I think there's a lot that I do like about personalized learning, and I think we all do. But given other constraints, how does it fit in? So I think it does warrant a little more evaluation by the seven of us.
I'm just going to make one quick comment. At a high level, I agree with what's being said across the group. When you look at, though, the 5 things that Randy has put here in this document that we would be discussing and then acting on, the first one's already in play and is getting finished right now. The second one is continuing a learning and training session that's already in place. The third one is looking at, again, this year and finalizing the roadmap. The fourth one is starting to put quantitative measures behind things, Ellen, as you've been asking for. And the fifth one is increasing communication. So into the 2019 year, what I see here is looking outward for an $8 million grant proposal that was submitted to the federal government. And so what I don't see here in the discussion, honestly, is making a long-term commitment to personalized learning or making a wholehearted endorsement of personalized learning. What I see here is a request to continue implementing the 2018-2019 pre-existing program, which doesn't conflict with the overall strategic planning process we're running, as Erica is suggesting we consider into the end of the 4th quarter. So let me pull it back a little more simply. The strategic plan right now is ongoing, and that process involves looking at every aspect of what we deliver from a curriculum perspective and matching that with our overall budget structure, right? So everyone here is saying the same thing, including Randy, that we want to deliver an opportunity to meet each kid where they are, and whether it's this dyslexic group that was here earlier or the gifted group that was here last week, we have a variety of needs. So what we can't do in a district, in my opinion, is intermittently, when we're looking at something that's tactical. This to me is not strategic, this is tactical. Would you agree? Is that this specific discussion is about advancing toward an action that involves this school year. What we're going to do when we get the feedback from the community, the forums, the budget process, the enrollment criteria data over the next 3 to 4 months is put in place a 1 to 5 year strategic plan. So I don't think those two things are different.
Personalized learning was just part of the old strategic plan. It was one of the goals to personalize learning more. And
Sure.
This is the tactical way to address it.
Sure, but what I'm looking at us agreeing upon tonight is nothing new. Nothing in those 5 sections has anything to do with 2019-2020 implementation. So I don't want to get hung up on these 5 items. I want to review this, as everyone's saying, holistically, looking at the strategic plan and all the feedback and the budget as a parameter over the next 3 or 4 months. But if the board, the 7 of us, were to continue to have the many, many work sessions we're having around these topics, I think that'll constructively get us toward answering those questions. I'm just saying right now at this moment on November 19th, I don't have issue with these 5 items that are here because they're all technically related to ongoing work, and the underlying thesis in numbers 3 and 4 is to give us more statistical evidence as to whether or not it's working. So I think that we should continue gathering evidence according to these 5 tactics, assess all of this over the next 2 or 3 months, match that to enrollment numbers, budget criteria, and overall curriculum deployment, and then make decisions that look out 1 to 5 years. Don't know if I just said a lot of words that just kind of glossed over. Everybody's getting a lot of gloss.
And I think my point is if you don't back up, and I mean, even just what you said right there, we have such limited resources that if we decide, Randy, we really want you to put together generating these outward-facing measures, and then in a separate meeting, we're like, okay, Randy, we really want you to create these new classes for this, and then in a separate meeting, we're like, and then that's what we keep doing. We keep having these separate meetings where we're like, we really want you to do this from a teaching and learning perspective. We really want you to do this, and all of them are huge priorities, but we're not talking about them together. And so even some of these tactical things take all of his time. And I think that we need to take a step back and help, as a board, help prioritize what, I mean, I don't think it's okay for us to ask him to, I don't think it's physically possible for him to do all of these measures for personalized learning, to come up with all these roadmaps, to do this, to come up with some new gifted classes, to do, because we're not looking at it all together. And so even it's a strategic discussion, but it's also a discussion about, it is a discussion about tactics and prioritizing what we're going to do. And and without doing that, without looking at what would it take to get these things done holistically, that's where I get uncomfortable with signing off on this and saying, all right, go forth and do this, Randy. And then, again, we're having a meeting like December 6th talking about gifted and talented stuff and say, all right, Randy, go work on this stuff. And maybe it might be completely juxtaposed against what we're telling you to do with the personalized learning stuff. Because we're talking about them at 2 completely different meetings. So go work on this, but then do this. I just...
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying that this list here is tactical for 2018-2019. And we knew the strategic planning would take 6 to 9 real months of work, and we're about 2/3 of the way into that. So from that perspective, I wouldn't have Randy stop any of these 5 that are ongoing right now for the 2018-2019 year. 2019 plus, this is fluffy. Here at the bottom, monitor, finalize, consider. We can work on all of this as a group and get to that holistic setting in the next 2 months. But in the interim, I think pausing on the work that's ongoing and getting to, Owen, as you've pointed out several times, metrics on 3 and 4 would be a mistake. So I understand the dynamic in the conversation, and I think that you're right, Erica, and I think everyone's right about looking holistically at what can we offer, what resources do we have, and how we do that. I just think that in the interim, there's still 8,500 students, and we need to keep moving on what we're already doing and start to quantify it. And that's what these 5 tactics here do. It's not operations. It doesn't say add, 1 second, sir. It doesn't say add 3 employees in number 3. It doesn't say number 5, spend $20,000 on 10 different community surveys. It says start to quantify what we're doing. That's the holistic nature of this document. So I'm very supportive of these 5 goals, and I want us to hit this really hard in the next 3-4 months as a group.
See, Randy, can you just remind me, when we were at our last meeting, we were talking about the level of implementation that we're at. And maybe, like, do you think 20, 30, 70% of our teachers are doing this at this point? Because I think you had said something about it's still in the earlier stages. So I was just wondering if you could share some of that with us.
Sure. So I would say our middle schools are furthest along in implementing the strategies across the school. What we do is we survey our staff, we survey students, and we survey families every year through a satisfaction survey. And that's internal data. But one of those we use for our staff development goals. So last spring we looked at a particular element of personalization, offering students voice and choice in student assignments and activities. And 87% of our staff reported doing that for 30% of their student assignments and activities. One of the things that the design team learned this fall in some training is we looked at other school systems that use a continuum. So for each of these strategies, there can be a continuum that's more teacher-centric versus student-centric. So if you put that on a rubric, on a 4-point rubric, and if you have all teachers report on that, we would have a much better sense of across the district where all of our teachers are at on each of those strategies. Now, in our design team, our different levels have looked at some different continuums, but we don't yet have a continuum that's consistent K-12 for evaluating that. So it's difficult to answer how far we are in all these strategies across the district. We have some data from satisfaction surveys with the teachers, but we know that through the plan that we're building in the roadmap, we would complete the training in 2 years.
So I do share some of the concerns that Erica has listed about the fact that we are embarking on a number of different areas. I guess the question I would have for you, Randy, is as you look at your schedule going forward and you say to yourself, okay, we're about to talk about advanced academics, we're going to talk about intervention programs in the spring, we're looking at secondary programs, we're looking at elementary program changes. So as you look at the basket of items that might land on your plate or that are already on your plate, so are there things within the personalized learning proposal you have here that can easily stay on your plate? I mean, what's your view as the head of teaching and learning as to whether we should pull this back, take a 30,000-foot look, or whether we should sort of pick some of these and go forward? So, for example, I mean, applying for the grant, I wouldn't see any reason we wouldn't continue that, but I'm going to turn the question to you.
So we tried to articulate, and the design team helped support constructing this, because this is work that the design team feels like we could accomplish this year. One of the most difficult things was asked at a previous board work session, like, can we tie changes in achievement to specific practices? And we know that to do that, we would need to know which classrooms are doing which practices to which level, and then how did students in that classroom achieve. And that can be done. It's program evaluation. We would need support to do that. But that's more of a long-term goal that as we implement these practices that the research says makes a difference with kids, if we want to scientifically study that internally, that's going to require additional resources. That's going to be difficult for us to do without getting additional support or resource.
So that would be something we would list that we should probably figure out what our overall plan is first before we jump too far into that one.
And I think it overlaps with the conversations around success measures through that work group. Like, how do we want to report publicly on the progress of these different strategic plan elements? And if we need to do program evaluation internally to report that publicly, then we would need some resource and time to build that internally. The other pieces that we have here, as Matt described, we've been working on a common model. We've been working on common language. We have drafts of both of those now. We have been working on training with staff around these 3 core elements, but we still have work to do around that. We feel like that's very doable. There, at each of the levels, the high school, the middle schools, the elementary, are building roadmaps. So that's started now. And, we also already currently collect satisfaction survey internally annually. We can continue to do that. And then the stakeholder feedback or the stakeholder communication needs to continue to be enhanced. So in terms of what's doable, I do feel like our team and the personalized learning design team can continue to progress on these. I do think the success measures piece is going to take a lot of vetting out and work with the board around that. And I completely understand Erica's point of how does this all fit together? Because if we're talking personalization, we're actually talking a very, very broad scope of needs of kids. And so there are a lot of discussions of around intervention that are occurring that need to continue to move forward. There's discussion around how we meet the needs of learners who are outpacing what we're doing in a traditional classroom. Those are all, to me, those are all aspects of how we are personalizing as a system.
And so the concern is that December 6th, we talk about secondary programs and whether that's going to add more to your plate. So maybe I'll ask the question again at the end of the evening on December 6th.
Right, but the class proposals on the 6th are regarding, I think, some of the because we're talking about course changes tonight, and they're the more basic ones, and so then the ones on the 6th, I think, are to address some of the leveled learning as part of the GT plan. And I get that, again, they're somewhat siloed, but I do believe that is a direct report out from the GT plan. Correct me if I'm wrong, though, please.
No, we are going to talk about our learning from how other school districts have structured their courses, and we want to propose some concepts for how we could structure course design moving forward that is in alignment with the concept of personalization, that is in alignment with ensuring a high level of rigor for all kids, and that has support for intervention.
You know, something that struck me while we've been talking here, Matt raised a very good point that we've got something in flight right now. And, we can't be disruptive with what's actually going on. Yet at the same time, we are planning the strategic plan and setting the course for the next 5, 6, 7 years. And it's sort of like a baton exchange that we've got one strategic plan, which is handing off to the next strategic plan. We're in the exchange zone right now. And so I think that we're actually raising an issue that I think will follow us for this year. Things are in flight, we probably should keep in flight. So I agree that maybe there isn't a lot we should do with this because it's going. By the same token, we do have to think holistically, and what kind of momentum will this carry on into the next year? And so it's almost like we ought to consider slowing down some of the implementations of some of these things if they have so much momentum that might go against a direction that we want to take with a strategic plan. And that's just something that struck me with Matt's comment that, yeah, this is actually kind of for this next year. And we can't, I mean, unless anybody has a different opinion about that, we can't be doing a lot of strategy for 2018, 2019, given that the strategic plan will take so much thought and priority. So I just raised that. I think that that's an interesting point because we've got something in flight versus we really want to be conscientious about where do we want to turn the rudder now.
Yeah, I'm just going to agree with Owen and myself one more time to say that I think as a board, what we should be doing is giving direction relative to what we're looking at. So from a governance perspective or even a mild operating influence, if we read this document, these 5 things, as Randy then elocuted specifically one by one, are all ongoing, and then we're going to have a discussion around 2019. And I don't see, Randy, am I missing something that's operationally more than $25,000 on this decision-making matrix?
Yes, he already told us that, which is in order to quantify academic achievement differences. That's the big ticket item for both time and money.
That decision relates to 2019, 2020, or 2018, 2019?
Well, if it's part of the current plan, you would be starting that soon.
But where do we have actual numbers attached to it in here? Because I think we would want to better understand the cost attached to that.
I'm relating this to the 2019 plus growth plan. So yes, in this current budget, to evaluate and move forward over the next 6-7 months to make sure we understand where is it or is it not working on quantification. I realize that is a dollar figure. I'm saying going forward today from this document of 2019 plus, what are the big spends that we might not be seeing operationally that we're agreeing to now or December 6th?
Yeah, I think as Lenny mentioned, if we were going to do the scientific analysis of it, program eval, that would be a big expenditure. The rest of it is some conference time, some sub time, and I could certainly build a budget or articulate the budget around it. And many of our staff meetings are, of course, built in. Our in-service dates are already built in. It's how we use the time that we have available in our calendar.
And let me just add another piece of information. As part of my superintendent goals, the board asked to do a program evaluation of the personalized learning. So that's related to bringing Carrie in. So I've put that on hold, knowing that we have the advanced academics that have come forward that could be evaluated also. So that's where that expense lies. And that would be
Carrie?
probably Center for Applied Research and Educational
Through the U.
The university.
The program through the university.
So that is, and that varies on what the level of that evaluation would be.
Could you explain a little bit more about that?
So what part? The Center for
The university.
Applied Research, the University
It
of
was
Minnesota?
in our packet from the last work session.
Dr.
So the-
Rodriguez?
No, so the
Different
So the
program.
board last summer talked about the evaluation of personalized learning. So when you do an evaluation, that's not something you do internally. An evaluation is done by a third party. So you would bring the engine of the University of Minnesota through Carrie to set evaluation goals or evaluation terms of personalized learning. And that was the plan for looking at and meeting that goal that Randy put forward.
So it seems, though, that sounds like a great idea, that we look into that. I'm looking at the order, and maybe there isn't an order with the numbering here. So maybe it doesn't, it looks like that's the fourth thing that you would get to, but it actually, in my mind, is the first thing before we do other action steps, is to make sure that we know that there is evidence that personalized learning is meeting the academic needs of our students. And so it would make most sense to, like, I'm listening to Matt saying, yes, and Randy, yes, we're doing this program, but before we decide that we're going to spend resources, like Erica just said, I think that we should make sure that we understand that it is working. And it doesn't, we know that there are programs that we want to do as a district that will cost money, that are truly evidence-based, that we know are low-hanging fruit that we may want to move forward on. I want to make sure that this likewise is as effective for our students.
So just to add to that, Ellen, and Erica's point of looking at the broader picture, and it might be that those evaluation dollars may be used in a different way once you have had that discussion. So I'm looking for your direction, the board's direction on that. But it might be more useful to have that broader discussion, continue with the goals that Randy's set out, and after we've had a more broader discussion, it might be more useful to maybe use, with the limited resources we have, to use those evaluation dollars in a different way. So it may not, to focus it on personalized learning at this time, we may say later on, after we've had the big picture, gee, I wish we would have done it a different way. So I think it is the kind of the timing of this and the order in which you do it. It may be best to put that particular goal on hold and have the broader discussion, and then use those dollars more wisely in a way that will inform the board better on those outward measures that we want to develop to know that our program is effective.
So my suggestion is that we, like I said, I think all of these recommendations are great. My suggestion is that we move forward with, because I'm certainly not suggesting that we stop working on what you're proposing, Randy, is to back out the measures of success. Randy, you move forward with all the great work you're doing on personalized learning. In conjunction with that, as a board, in short order, we have a conversation with Randy, John, that's a more strategic, holistic discussion about personalized learning and how it relates to some of these other things, so we can really understand, especially from a resource perspective, what we're talking about. And in that discussion, we can talk about what you just proposed, John, are there certain programs that we need to evaluate and have recommendations from an outside party about what we should do? And so then, I mean, I don't want to stymie the work you're doing, but I do think that we do have to have, because I will likely have the exact same feedback when we talk about gifted and talented programming, this is great, but if we do this, can we not do this? Because I don't understand how any of it affects anything in a broader context. And so we have to start talking about these issues from a broader strategic perspective as opposed to in silos.
And it has to include a budget discussion on top of it. And I'm just going to keep being the broken record on that one.
Well, that's the whole point. I mean.
So do we have a general consensus then on?
Well, we have more to say.
Yeah, one piece of the budget discussion, which is marked to be determined, that I'd like to bring into the discussion, since we're talking about this now, is we have clear dollar figures on many things, but we don't on budgets for teaching and learning and for other programs on that sheet. So what I'm trying to do is say, I would like to learn a little bit more about the bigger budget issues, because I can't, that's exactly what we're talking about here. I have no idea where all of this fits in the puzzle of making a budget work. And it seems as if we've got several departments that are, I don't really know why it's to be determined, but it is. Are you saying is your to be determined part of the original, where there was a couple line items, or not line items, because it was in a Word document, but the things that were left without numbers or FTEs on them?
You more holistically, Ellen, mean that we're looking at an elementary, middle, and secondaries, or higher education budgets, but you're not seeing a broken out teaching and learning or administrative budget or otherwise. You're talking holistically is what she's referring to.
Yeah, we've talked about that, yeah. Sorry. That's exactly what I mean. Yeah. Just a
great.
different way of slicing and dicing.
So I agree with Matt that this document is pretty innocuous. If your point is, how are we doing implementing this? We're doing fine, we're pushing it, it's on track, we need to communicate, we need to go a little deeper. I think the angst that comes out around this isn't necessarily around the push to implement, as in we might not be on track, but is it the track? And that's where the question of the analysis comes up. And it may not be the wisest expenditure, but it gets to the core of the discomfort about, is this what we should be pushing and communicating and deepening? And personally, I'm still not sure in my own mind which subject of the core, English, math, science, social studies, which subject lends itself most to this approach? Which subject lends itself least well? And likewise with developmentally appropriate implementation levels. And we've talked about how it would look different at different tiers, but even then, more specifically, how is 6th grade different than 7th? And disability versus GT, to the point of is it working for all students? And I think we need to emphasize what we expect working for all students means. Does that mean state standards? Does that mean maximizing their growth, helping them reach their potential in individual students? So just because a student knows the parts of the atom doesn't mean that that student may be excused now and will continue working with the others, but you haven't grown. In fact, you're at risk of sliding back because you had an amazing 5th grade teacher, and we need to grow you here and not just say, welcome to 6th grade, Minnesota expects a certain amount from you. Because then we're just another district, which is kind of the deepest fear of a lot of people who love this district, is that it becomes just another district. And the more we focus on what Minnesota expects, as it published 9 years ago with science, but they're coming back, a lot of years ago with various subjects, that if that's what we reach for, and that's the trigger point for when a student may be excused from the classroom to go flex, then that says that that's state standards are what's driving everything, not individual growth. And I know we're saying, well, they continue to grow and they have a research question, but what's the incentive? How do we know they're not trying to get their English paper done? And they've literally stopped growing in science. They've been excused because they met what the state said a 7th grader in Minnesota should be doing, regardless of the student's growth. And I don't want to go to the philosophy class, you're in a trolley and you have to make a decision type route, but if you've got students who are at risk of not growing, you've got students who are needing more attention to even meet the state standards, is that your call? That it's, you guys need a research question, flex out, I'll check in on you some more time, and I need to focus in over here, because that's a very different message than individual students and their individual growth plans are what we value. And I know personalized learning could go a lot of different ways, and the online profile lends itself to the individual knowledge, but that doesn't matter if the day-to-day experience is there's a Minnesota standard of knowledge, and beyond that it's sort of on you, on your own 7th grade interests to push yourself. And it contrasts a little bit with what I heard earlier tonight at the National Merit Recognition, because a lot of those students talked about the teacher's passion, the teacher's conversation, the teacher's high expectations, which is so different from you're free to go do your own research question because we have 3 days until we move on. That's not a research endeavor. No one would say, we have a great research opportunity for you, and it's a 72-hour deadline because we got to move on, the Minnesota standards move us on. It really does seem like we're doing the best you can without a teacher present. Sort of like a substitute day where you guys expect you to grow, but no one's going to be there with you much today. And that's apart, Matt, that's apart from this document, but that's the deeper uncomfortability, and I think that's what Owen started to get at, and even, I think that was what I heard. I heard fringes of what I was thinking around what you were saying. You were saying make sure we have it in a context for each student, disability and GT and this program, but you were talking about each student's growth, and not just where's the state standard at that point, but each student helping them grow, which I don't hear as much when we focus on the method, that the method is this, and we trust it'll work. It seems to work, in previous literature, elsewhere, broadly. I accept that. I'm not pushing back saying that it hasn't shown that promise. But anyway, I didn't mean to speak so long, but those have been my concerns, and it's beyond this document.
Well, this was being presented for discussion tonight, and certainly generated that. There's no decision being asked at this time. So
are there other questions?
Thank you.
And by the way,
What do you want us to bring back, though, in December? Yes.
Yes.
I'll go first, see if people like this or not. I think these 5 things to me make sense. Number 4, Randy, I would like to just understand what costs at a high level are being applied to that activity, and what is the outcome expected to be. Does it reinforce or challenge the way we've been doing things? Does it give us metrics or granularity to enable you to make assessments or the board to make reviews in the future for decision-making around the strategic plan outcomes? And then related to the 2019 part, I wasn't being, demonstrative when I called it fluffy. I just meant these were discussion points.
Right.
And around the 2019 goals, I would like to see personally, that's not a pun, I would like to see myself what, by time frame, decisions you would like to implement in order to maintain, grow, or stop or change this programmatic approach. So while we can't stop the train right now, what points can we divert activities or reformat activities? So again, for me, those were 2 things. They were budget and outcomes relative to big metrics in decision-making, and secondarily, what are our offshoots that the recommendations or requests are asking for, where we can change course or pull in strategic planning elements or holistically evaluate all programs. Those would be my 2 asks.
Others?
Well, my thoughts are that as to use Matt's term, as a tactical document, as in setting up a plan for the execution of the central aspect of our instruction next year, this seems reasonable. As a strategic document, I wouldn't put much weight in it, because we do want to visit this. And so I don't want to create any expectation that this is necessarily where we're going in 2019, 2020. So, because I think we do need to have a holistic discussion and put this in a broader framework.
John and Randy, was that specific enough from the board about what we want to see in December?
Board members have other things they want to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple things. I am concerned about the amount of screen time that this involves, and if you could just speak to that, particularly at the elementary level. So, so I'm just wondering how when I understand our reading program our current reading program has a lot of personalized learning elements to it, and I am concerned about the amount of time first and second and third graders are in front of the screen during the day. So,
Yeah, I'll just add that personalization does not mean screen time. But we know that the reasons that we want to use technology are to enhance the learning situation. So it shouldn't be just, here's another way to do it using technology. It should be a decision of using the technology because it's actually doing something that we can't do without it, if that makes sense. I don't know, Steve, if you could speak to any statistics or any data that we've collected around screen time, but I will say that last spring when I shadowed some of the parent groups over at Southview, a number of the comments from the parents were, I thought kids would be on their devices more. And so it seemed to actually be the opposite reaction at Southview.
Sure. Good evening, Board. This is a really important topic for us, and in particular, it's a important topic for me because last winter I was at the parent presentation at Southview, and we talked a lot about technology is an incredibly powerful tool, and it can be incredibly powerful for benefit and negative. And so my mantra has been for the last few years is how do we accentuate the positive aspects of technology and mitigate the negative? Excessive screen time is an example of the negative component of that. To that end, we worked with every teacher in the district last year to talk about being very intentional about their use of screen time. And in particular, at those ages of K1 and 2, we adhere to the American Pediatrics Association's guidelines around screen time, which is very little to none at all. Now, there is some differentiation, and there's some talk about consumptive screen time versus educational screen time, so that if you're just consuming information versus actually using a manipulative or responding to a quiz or a higher order thinking, using that technology for our higher order thinking, we differentiate that. And so we've been very intentional about not using technology at those ages as much as possible and making sure that it has a value add, as Dr. Smazzo talked about. In the reading program, I believe all the reading is that Caroline Little distributed is in the form of books, real books, and so that's what our students are using at those ages to read on. We do look at how we can also purchase digital copies of those books, and primarily we do that because we feel like when a student's on vacation or holiday over a break and they want to travel, that they can, through their parents' guidance and assistance, they can get that book digital format, so they don't have to carry 4 or 5 books. They're carrying the digital books in the form of a Kindle reader, things like that. So appreciate your comment, and that's something that we're really trying to make sure that we're aware of and mitigating as much as possible.
thank you.
So I'm okay with the outline that Matt put together. I would say that when we talk about cost, it's not just dollars, it's also hours. So it's resource commitment is the way I would phrase it, so that you don't limit it to it'll cost $10,000, because I'd want to know how many hours of work is involved. And then the other point is that we do need to take a look at the overall picture of how the various things that we're looking at, how they fit together. But that's going to be distinct from what you come back with in December.
Yeah, and could you explain to me how our district currently is using MAP scores? Because that's a test that they're currently taking, and it measures growth, and so it wouldn't be an additional cost, except for the time. So I'm just wondering, we know what classrooms are implementing personalized learning. If you would feel that we could use some of our, without making it much worse. I don't know how we're currently using MAP scores, so my guess is if they are a measure of student growth, this might be appropriate, and we may be able to get a reading on whether or not students are growing.
Is your question, how are we using maps in terms of gauging the success of personalized learning, or are you asking the?
If we could use it in order to, as a measurement of success.
That's exactly why we have our measures of success team, to try to define what are those things that we should be using to measure success. That's exactly why we're having those conversations.
Right, but I'm just trying to say, sometimes it sounds like we're trying to get very complicated with, for example, and I'm saying if we are currently using MAP scores to decide whether or not students are growing, if not, why are we taking them? I'm just kind of wondering how we're using them now, and whether, I know what you're saying is, yes, we want a comprehensive look at this, but right now, I'm just trying to say, we could use a indicator that students are growing.
You know, on that note, I would love to see that at the board level. So we do need to move on, but since you brought it up, Ellen, I think it would be great for us to be able to see aggregates of the MAP scores over the past couple of years and what projections might be. Get some hardcore rigor into our evaluation. The teachers use it, it's their bread and butter.
So that's sort of a general question and request that, right, so right. So I think before you try to figure out the answer to that, you're going to need more specific, and maybe you can talk about this at teaching and learning and try to get the question defined a little bit better. Otherwise, I think you're kind of just gathering data and presenting it.
Sure.
All right. Thank you.
We're making it so hard.
Secondary course proposals.
Report number 3. Thank you. We'll continue on with our new course proposals and course changes. This is intended to be part 1. These are some of the course proposals and course changes mainly coming from the high school at this time. As I mentioned earlier, we'll have additional discussion about some other ideas for a few other course proposals and changes at the December 6th meeting. But in our conversation in the Teaching and Learning Board Committee, I think for the most part we felt that these were ready to bring to the board, and we recognize I'm sure there'll be some questions around some of them. So just fairly quickly, the way I've organized this is to identify what are the courses we intend to drop from the course catalog. Typically, we would drop courses that have not run for 3 years or haven't been viable for 3 years. But
So Randy, I'm going to interrupt here for
Yes.
a second. You've got a relatively detailed report here. I don't know if people have questions about it as opposed to just kind of going through it again.
Sure.
Because I think we've had the opportunity to read it. We can see, so just to try to short circuit and see.
Yeah,
Are
absolutely.
there specific questions?
We reviewed this in teaching and learning, and as I had kind of alluded to earlier, the course drops were based, you know, they're courses that are not, kids aren't signing up for them. And then Randy's just tightened up some of the changes in language and some new offerings. And then most of them were you know, relating to courses that kids are desiring. An expansion a little bit in Phi-Ed with the soccer theory, but like the courses for, you know, another level of digital photography, getting into cybersecurity, just some interesting courses to help expand our kids. And of course, you know, with every course that's new, you know, enrollment will be a part of whether it goes forward. But the one that we actually spent some time talking about at teaching and learning, and maybe Randy can share a little bit about this, was the Capstone Fine Arts. Just as a different approach to the capstone, and we, do you want to just share a little bit more
Sure.
about that, how a student in that area can take a deeper dive?
So we went back and did some rethinking about just the capstone concept in itself, and said, why don't we look at capstone as an elective opportunity, not a required opportunity for students? And so we have students that get to the end of a sequence or a learning opportunity in a department or an area, and then it's really an opportunity for them to demonstrate that learning that they've done over the course of the years through a student-designed project with a mentor or a facilitator, or it might be a group of students working together on a project, or it could be that students are simply using this course with the mentor to go do an internship with a business or with somebody in the community. And so the idea of a capstone course being a culminating elective type of opportunity where students could apply skills and knowledge that they've learned throughout the sequence of courses in that particular department or that particular area. So what we'd propose is that we'd have a capstone fine arts offered next year as a semester course, and students would work on projects together for that course. They would be co-designing with the teachers the outcomes of those projects. It'd be available to students in the upper grade levels. And if this works out well and there's student interest, we could explore down the road a capstone STEM, a capstone humanities, etc. But really just kind of reframing it in the idea of making it an elective pathway for students.
Randy, one of the questions that I had since we met on this, before we met with the elementary teachers and, elementary principals and discussing further, budget reductions, I just wanted to make sure that the dollars that you have listed in here for the development costs of the curriculum, do you feel that you have the resources to cover that?
Yeah, we typically have a portion of our teaching learning budget to address the needs of new courses or course changes. And so we do anticipate those being part of that budget each year. This totals about around 11,000 currently, and it's a pretty small portion of the teaching learning budget today.
Okay, I just wanted to verify that. Thank you.
I've got a couple questions about the math changes. I'm seeing two things we've got on page 2, compacted algebra. My first question about that is, where in the sequence is that, and what's the point of it? You asked that, do you know?
I just want to say, it struck us in the committee too, as it was hard to follow that sequence, but it makes sense. I'll let Randy answer though.
I will attempt to explain without my buddy Mark Carlson, our math TOSA here. So basically, through the new math standards, we will be phasing out a course at the high school called Function, Statistics, and Trig. And that course, the content from that course will be embedded into the other math courses at an earlier sequence. So as we went through the math standards and purchased new materials, we're having to reorganize the math courses a little bit, so the flow looks a little different. So in the past, students would start off potentially in Math 6 in 6th grade, then they would take pre-algebra, algebra, geometry, advanced algebra, and then either FST or AP Stats and Trig. A new pathway will be Math 6 and pre-algebra, so that's the same. Algebra 1, intermediate algebra, geometry, algebra 2. But there could be an accelerated pathway for students where they would basically be getting 4 years of math in 3, and that would be through compacted algebra. So that algebra sequence would include a lot more of the statistics that previously was in FST, and that'll be fused into a little different sequence in math that aligns better with the standards that the math teachers reviewed. We have visual maps to help understand how the sequence is a little different than it would be previously, and so we've begun to add those to the course catalog so that it's easier. You don't have to read through everything. You can just kind of see visually how the course sequence flows. But it has to do with standards preparation and trying to get some of that statistics out in front of when students are taking that MCA.
So it's not as if FST was found wanting. It's more that the new framework asks different questions and has different requirements.
Yeah.
Okay, and then on page 4, we have intermediate algebra. And where is this going to fit in? Is this filling in for an additional year of algebra, or what's the context here?
Yeah, so algebra is critical to students' foundation in mathematics. So some students will do algebra 1 in 8th grade and then complete intermediate algebra in 9th grade. Students in compacted algebra would be getting all of that algebra in 1 year in 8th grade. So that would be an accelerated version of that.
And so what does the math progression look like in high school? There's usually 3 tracks, right?
So I don't have all of that sitting in front of me, but so students would, if they were accelerated through compacted, they would take geometry and then algebra 2 and then go into other math electives from there. Otherwise, they would take intermediate algebra in 9th grade, then geometry, then algebra 2 after that.
And where does stats come in? No.
Stats will be embedded in that math sequence instead of this being a standalone. That FST, functions, statistics, and trig will be embedded in that earlier sequence.
Is there any way that we could see a graphic of that?
Sure.
Of the tracks?
Yeah, absolutely. I can
Yeah, we're
get that
gonna,
to you.
you're updating the math sequencing. So right now, he needs to go in and fix some of so that it's easier to understand.
It doesn't lend
But it
itself to
sound-
radio.
Well, when we were talking the other day, it sounded like there's just different ways that we can, a student who's coming out of 8th grade algebra wouldn't just necessarily have to go then to geometry and then to algebra. You could do it, is this correct, Randy? You could do algebra 8 or 8th grade algebra and then do the advanced algebra in 9th grade and then do geometry in 10th grade. It gives the kids some more options
Flexibility.
and flexibility, because I think there has been, sometimes there's that leap, where you take a year off of algebra and then you go back to it, and there's, for the kids, it doesn't always align. So anyway, it's just another way, another option for our kids to go through the system, which I think actually hopefully gives them a better experience, because it can follow what their needs are.
And not a longer path through math. So it's
Not
the same-
longer, nope.
Same pathway to get to calculus or multivariable calculus, just to throw that one in. So I did have a question about this idea that's just been bantered around a little bit of putting some courses out every other year to try to get bigger class sizes in those courses to keep other classes from having to feel that pinch. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if John, this is for you or Randy, who'd be in charge of sort of picking which courses and which years? Is that at your level, or is that at the high school administration level or at the department level? To try to consider that idea and see if it's worth merit in given areas.
Would be ultimately Andy's, ultimately be Andy's decision, along in collaboration with those departments.
Thank you.
Yep.
And can I get back to the capstone arts? I'm looking at the curriculum cycle and seeing that arts is scheduled for the 4th year of the review cycle in 2021. So I realize as we talk as a group, we don't like to make changes to curriculum sequences.
So I think that schedule, is that from policy, from the policy?
This is policy.
Okay, so I apologize, because I think that schedule needs to be updated. They're actually in review this year. K-12 art and K-12 music are in review this year.
To be implemented next year?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I apologize. We'll make sure that we get that policy diagram updated.
So on the capstone fine arts, is that a potential lead-in to eliminating the capstone graduation requirement?
Yes.
That's probably a second needed board discussion topic around capstone is to, if we're going to go the elective route, then do we just take that off as a graduation requirement?
Okay, so it's a potential direction. Great.
And
can you
we've continued to have that discussion, and we've delayed it by graduating class and then the next graduating class. So I think Randy just brought it up as something to discuss as we go forward as a board.
And as we're discussing it, and we're discussing the concern about small class sizes, and I look at the way that this is structured, it almost by definition is going to be a small class. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
So it has to be viable to run, and it could very well possibly be that it's not viable the first year. Hopefully the second year, we would have to see, but we certainly would have to hit enrollment numbers to be able to offer it, just like any of the new courses or any of our existing courses. Sometimes we're able to collapse courses together to be able to run them. For example, we might run Chinese 4 and Chinese 5 together if they're lower on the enrollment, so that we can run both of those courses. So sometimes we do that, and we do that when it works with the teacher so that we can still offer them. To Amir's point, it might be that some of these capstones are offered every other year if they're low enrollment. That might be another way that we could get to the enrollment capacity. I think it's a good question.
I think it also lends itself to a lot more flexibility because it is project-based and the students will be outside of the classroom working on their own for the vast majority of the time. If they're checking in with a teacher once a week or however it's monitored, maybe the teacher is teaching both this class and has 5 capstone students, and then she works with her capstone students within the confines of something else that she's doing. So I think there are a lot of ways that you can organize this outside of the traditional 1 teacher to 30 student ratio. And I think that's the exciting thing about this actually, is being able to offer some of these experiences within and just being flexible and creative about it, which is something that I really appreciate that both Andy and Randy came up with this and put forward. So thank you.
All right, great. I think that completes the questions on that. Next is Legislative Action Committee. Randy, I'd really like it if you could stay and do this presentation too.
I'll be back. The world's best workforce here in a minute.
So Legislative Action Committee is Ellen and Owen. Looks like I think we talked about this at the work session. There.
We have a member in our...
Two.
Two members here. Oh, sorry. We have members in our audience from our Legislative Action Committee.
So I don't know if people have questions about it. This is pretty well laid out.
Motion to support.
Well, we are.
Discussion tonight.
It is discussion, and what is in here, we had decided, I want to just make you all aware, we had decided to make a few changes at the last work session. So I don't know if it's necessary for me to go through those changes, or my committee.
Were they language changes?
Right.
There were some language changes and then some
fine.
more.
Okay.
Does this document reflect the changes?
No.
Okay, that's why I was
So that's why I'm
confused.
bringing it up.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
No,
Okay,
that's why I'm
thank you.
bringing it up. Our committee has not yet been able to meet, so we haven't come up with the wording changes to propose to you all.
Okay. So this is exactly what we saw at the work session.
It's exactly what you saw.
All right.
Okay.
All right, so this will come back next month, and you'll have the wording changes.
And we'll approve it then.
Sounds great.
And we all agree this has been great work by the committee.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, policy updates.
All right, so many of these are not terribly substantive at this point. We've kept the, let's see, was it student travel one because of consultation with our lawyer, and so we'll bring that back to policy committee again and continue that discussion. So, policy 503, student attendance, some smaller updates. A lot of emphasis in here on tardies, which wasn't previously a large point of it. Just a lot of grammar, though, just emphasizing punctual and regular and punctual attendance in addition to not just being away from class overall. We emphasize the dissemination of the policy, but nothing that stands out to me as major changes. Any questions on the student attendance one?
I do have a question. It's around the verbiage towards the end. It's on the form for prearranged personal absences. And it says, students will not be excused for prearranged absences occurring on state-mandated testing dates. Prearranged absences on those dates will be marked as unexcused. And I noticed that there was a sub-bullet where it was scratched out, which said that students will not be excused unless arrangements have been made with the staff and school. So I guess my question is, because students are allowed by the state to opt out of testing, how do we handle a situation where a student has been given permission by our state to opt out, but we have a policy that says you have to stay in school on this state mandated testing day? What? That section is still in there. And so I didn't know, I was just,
I don't know that testing is the full day, so it might be.
but the policy says students will not be excused for prearranged absences occurring on state mandated testing dates. And prearranged absences on those dates will be marked as unexcused. So if that's our policy,
If they're allowed to, yeah, if they're allowed to opt out, that's inconsistent.
yes.
Yeah.
I don't,
It's for that period of time when they're testing is what the state would say. So if they were in the
correct.
rest of the day. then-
Correct. Or obviously, there's verbiage around if you're testing, you have to tell us so you can make it up. But it's the people that have their legal right to opt out.
We didn't talk about this at all in committee. I wonder if we ought to take it
Then-
back to revise it,
Then what do we do about those kiddos?
because it does sound like it's a contradiction.
Yeah.
We didn't even.
Yeah, it's in an appendix, we didn't look at it very closely, but we can still bring this for action in a month. If that's merely removed, that'll be,
So,
yeah.
so what would you be recommending, that they not be required to be in school during the testing time?
I don't necessarily have a recommendation. I could just see a parent, if they're planning on opting the kid out of the test, and the test is taking all day or whatever, choosing not to have their kid to go to school that day, and then to see the school saying, well, that's unexcused, I could see that being, there's a conflict there. I don't necessarily have a recommendation. I just think it's an aspect that needs to be taken a look at, because I think it's an issue that probably hasn't really been an issue until fairly recently, or come up that often, so.
What I'm just hearing is that it's an inconsistency, and we just ought to rectify that. And I think we ought to just work the language out. And would that I think that would satisfy the issue.
Erica, you're only seeing it on the form, you're not seeing it anywhere else in the policy, is that correct?
Correct, it's only on the form.
Okay, so I wonder,
Seems like it's a straightforward issue.
yeah, I mean, it could be something that I can take back and modify this language, and you could move the policy forward. If the board's more comfortable, bring it back to the committee, that's fine too.
So it's going to come back next month, and so.
Oh, true.
Right,
Okay,
so if you can make a
just
change by
amend
then.
Got it, that's right, you're right.
It's a good catch, it's a good
Yeah.
catch. We
All
can
right.
just amend that.
Next.
Sentence.
Go
All
ahead.
right, so then we go to the 200 series, we have conflict of interest, criminal and civil action involving the school district, school board member development, school board committees, out-of-state travel by school board members, and school board representation. Not terribly substantive changes to any of those.
Weren't all of those literally just language changes?
Yeah, there's a small reference, yeah.
Forward.
Yeah, very small references otherwise.
Everyone was,
Good.
there was nothing substantial change.
Right.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Amir. We are moving on to action items. The first item is the World's Best Workforce Summary Report. Can I get a motion to accept the report?
Second? We're going to.
So, Randy, are you up on this one? Donna? So I think that this was gone over in some detail at the public hearing. This is kind of an opportunity for the board to ask questions because the public hearing was more of an opportunity for the public to ask questions.
Also, just to clarify, the report is the report that Donna will send into the state. And the presentation that we did for the community was a PowerPoint presentation done with more visual aids to illustrate what she has written up here in the report. So this doesn't have the pretty PowerPoint that was the community may have seen at the presentation. That's all I wanted to clarify.
So maybe we'll just start with questions because unless you have some overarching, nope. All right, go with questions. Owen, did you?
I do. The first thing is, I'd like to talk about the third grade literacy scores. And I am a little bit concerned about what's happening here. This is one of the key metrics of the district. And we went down 4.5 points in 1 year on students hitting projected growth targets with the MAP scores. And then proficiency on the MCAs across all groups who went down 7.5%. And I think that's eye-catching. And as the board, I think we have a responsibility to ask why, ask what we're doing to arrest this. I poked around and I heard something about that we're teaching with a new curriculum, Lucy Calkins, is it? And did I hear anything about that? Okay. So maybe could you give a little background to why you think this has happened? I think I'd be interested first in hearing that and then what we're doing to remediate this.
Thank you, Chair Michelson. Sorry about that. So when we did get our third grade results, we did, immediately recognize that this was a significant drop. And in working with Caroline Linden, went into kind of investigation mode to try to figure out, well, what exactly is happening here? In part, we can tell it's a system-wide effect. It's happened with every student group. And, mostly in every single building, there's one building that maybe didn't have as much of an effect. But we have been really digging into that. We've been looking very closely at the whole materials, what's perhaps needing supplementation in regards to the learning that those kids got as, in particular, first and second graders, because we did somewhat expect an implementation dip, but we expected it last year and it happened. We expected it the prior year and it happened last year. So, when you do large-scale implementations of new resources coupled with new instructional strategies, you tend to see these kinds of things. However, I don't want you to think we didn't take it serious. We are very, very serious about it. We are focusing a lot of efforts on identifying who the kids are and what their needs might be to try to supplement and make sure that they're growing the way that they need to for their fourth grade shot at the next MCA. We sort of knew this in January last year when our winter maps came in. And as you know, one thing that we use the winter maps to do is to predict how we might perform on the MCA. So we knew in January there was a little bit of an issue mid-year, and we mobilized. Our TOSAs got out and spoke with teacher teams using the Minnesota Department achievement level descriptors as a way to try and align some of the unit work that they were doing. And we actually saw almost a 5% increase in performance than what we projected. So we do think that these are there's some problems we can solve
And we're kind of going after it very proactively. So not a surprising thing to see, again, when you do a large-scale implementation with new resources and new pedagogy. Just a lot of complexities to that whole thing. So anyway, and I don't know if Andy or Randy wants to add anything to that.
I'll just add that another thing we're doing this year is we're meeting with the principals with our teaching learning specialists, and we're trying to identify what are needs specific to your building that you have and how our teaching learning specialists can support the principals at that site. And that conversation is heavily based around where their data is at from last spring, and so we're working from that.
I'm seeing that the last paragraph, we're intentionally quoting the document, administering a mid-year map test to all students. The results will provide a way for us to see where alignment issues and additional supports may be needed. When is that test going to be administered?
So at the elementaries, it's in January.
Okay.
Yep.
As the board, could we get a report on that?
We can certainly aggregate out our winter map results, and we have done that in the past, so I don't think there's an issue with that.
Okay, because I think it'd be pretty important for us to be able to see that, see where we're going, because these are pretty concerning figures and definitely going the wrong direction. And I think it'd be very good for us to see that we're arresting this and we're moving the right direction. You know, there's quite a bit of back chatter in some of the circles I'm traveling in about what we're doing with dyslexics and early reading intervention, and that we could do more with interventions with Orton Gillingham. And I've heard quite a bit of anecdotal evidence that there are kids who are not being served. Just today we heard that Grove's largest constituent population, what community it draws from the most, is from Edina. And I know anecdotally a lot of people go up there. And so I'm a little concerned, are we not getting these, are we not pulling out our kids who have true dyslexia? We've got the FAST test that's being administered, and I know that a number of people have made proposals that we do more to pull those kids out who have discerned reading difficulties and give them more full-time attention, rather than kind of mixing them into the general population with the balanced literacy approach. And for a dyslexic kid, the balanced literacy just doesn't cut it. They're not going to really learn how to read in that context. And I'm just wondering if these numbers are reflective of that. And we are getting a different kind of cohort of students coming through, and so maybe and I can't remember the sub-segmentation of the slide that you showed us. There's 2 separate slides with about 8 different groups on each slide, but they all went down except for 2. So I think I'd be interested in continuing this discussion about how this might be relating to our dyslexic population, if there are kids who are not dyslexic who are struggling with this too. So I think it invites an ongoing discussion.
Other questions? All those in favor of accepting the World's Best Workforce Report, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, can I get a motion to approve the Legislative Action Committee bylaws?
So moved.
So Ellen, these are probably the same as we saw last month?
Yes. These are exactly the same as you saw last month. Are there any questions?
All those in favor of approving the Legislative Action Committee bylaws, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Can I get a motion to approve board policies 205, 206, and 209?
So moved.
Second.
Amir, any?
Yeah. So 206 is updated, actually even since our committee meeting, with an attempt to respond to your point of our message to the community at open forum versus agenda times. Merely says the agenda items are equally applicable to open forums. Lenny, does that meet your concern, or does that?
Yes.
No other updates. Are there questions from other members of the board?
All those in favor of approving board policies 205, 206, and 209, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. We are on to information. Do we have it? And also, we will get the committee reports. Any superintendent information?
I was just wondering if Dr. Schultz could address the demographic study that's in our
Yes.
information portion.
Thank you.
Particularly since we're coordinating that with the city of Edina.
So as I think we talked about in the work session, a couple of work sessions ago, we had the enrollment. One of our recommendations was to conduct a demographic study using state demographer Hazel Reinhardt's not state demographer anymore. She's a retired state demographer to do a demographic study of the school district. The city of Edina is also interested in that same kind of study. So working with Scott Neal, the city has agreed to pay for half of that study, but then it'll be extended to the full city of Edina since some of our boundaries don't include, school boundaries don't include the city boundaries. So, the city will be participating.
Extrapolate for us.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
And then we will present this study to a joint meeting between the board and the city.
And what type of timing do you see for that?
Margot, what are you thinking?
They said up to 3 months, and so I'll continue. We sent the October data to them. By the end of October, there's a lot of history. It's not just October 1 enrollment.
Mhm.
There's a lot of data. And so I will check in with them. I want to give them a little bit of time and then check in with them. But they said within 90 days.
Yeah. And that study both involves look at enrollment, demographics, birth rate, mobility, but also includes a look at housing too. So it's a two-pronged approach. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, and well, I know that was part of 4 possible recommendations from when we last talked about enrollment back in October. And so I'm wondering, so the demographic study, obviously, we're moving ahead on. What about the other things that have been recommended, like facility capacity study, class size guidelines? We were going to talk about that. But then one of the ones that I'm concerned about is a district census within our own information system. So making sure that the data that we have internally is up to date, and also wanting to do some kind of a follow-up with enrollment from last year to this year, particularly with students who chose to leave the district, who were on our roster last year and aren't this year, getting an actual individual report from them as to why they left, so that it's everything from we moved as a family, but really digging in deep to our enrollment. I've been looking back at the reports over the last, well, I went back to 2010, as far back as we can go in board book, but looking at all the different reports and the analyses that have been in those over the years, and looking at projections even, which we didn't have in this year's, but, looking at the projection for this year, it was meant to be even higher than the 93 that we keep talking about. So I definitely want to make sure that internally we're doing some things and request that we do a follow-up with families that chose not to return to the district this year, just to start to get a gauge as to why our enrollment numbers went the way that they did.
You want to talk about the facility study?
Yes, I should actually have that. I need to obviously review it and have some time with it, but I should have it in the next week or two. I did touch base with them last week, so, and there is no cost to that one, that study.
And then the last couple haven't done anything with that yet, Sarah, with regards to following up with other families. And then so we'll work on that. What was the one right after the facility study? The
census.
Oh, the class size, yep, class size guideline, yep.
I'm
Yep.
assuming that will come, that discussion will come,
Yep,
but I
it will.
think,
Yep.
I guess as a board member, my concern is that we had projections, and, I just charted out, where our enrollment has been, and to see that, our enrollment is down, the lowest it's been down, it's lower than the last 4 years. So you have to go back to 13, 14 to see this enrollment number. So I want us to, again, back to budget, back to classes, all the things that we've talked about tonight, to get our head wrapped around why and going forward, because I do feel like because of this change, we're put in a bit of a reactive situation in the terms of the way we're having to look at some of the budget cuts. And like I said, I really do appreciate what our secondary teachers or administrators were able to do. But I think their job's a bit easier to do that with the way that they do classes. I'm very worried about what could come back from our elementary principals, because they're just locked into a different system in terms of areas to cut. And so I want us to be thinking bigger picture in terms of the budget and looking at cuts and putting more things on the table. I think we would, do a disservice to the community if we don't think bigger picture with where we're going with some of these things, because this enrollment is it's an unusual dip. I'm not sure why we didn't necessarily see it coming, but if you look for 4 years, we have not had enrollment this low. So I think we have to better understand the why behind it, but then we also need to think about where we're going with budget cuts, because we don't want to exacerbate anything that would continue that enrollment trend. And I think we mentioned this a little bit, Amir, and talked about calculus many times, but I think there's lots of different things that if we have to cut them permanently, we could potentially lose more students or exacerbate those trends. But, if they're population trends that we'll find out from Hazel Reinhardt, there's that too. But I just want us to go much more global on this and hopefully not be in a reactive situation that may not be, good long-term.
You're right. The variables for enrollment there are a lot of them. So going global, we just can't look at the facility study. We just can't look at class size values. You're going to have to look at everything you listed in the big picture.
All right. We were going to do committee reports. Sarah, do you have a quick 30-second overview of teaching and learning?
I think actually we've covered a lot of teaching and learning tonight already with all the reports and different things that we're doing. The only thing I would add is that with pre-AP 10, there's going to be a survey done within all the classes. And then we're waiting to hear a report on how we will do embedded honors in pre-AP 10 for second semester. And I believe that'll probably be part of our report in December, on December 6th, when Randy comes back to us with that.
All right. I'll do the quick finance update. Finance, we talked about long-term facilities. That comes up every year to approve, and so we're taking a look at whether we might be able to move up the timeline for some work at the Normandale area. Another item we talked about was the potential for solar panels. There is a possible opportunity that's being investigated, and we'll get more information and feedback on that. And the last, we talked about our favorite topic, which is TIF. And it was just a matter of sitting there saying that we're going to take a look as a finance committee at any TIF proposals from the city, sorry. We don't have TIF ability. And that was kind of the highlights from finance. Anybody else have anything they want to put in?
I was wondering if there was an update on the Success Measures Committee. I know it came up a little bit tonight, so have you guys met again since we had our meeting or had the discussion back in October?
So we haven't met because the consensus was to wait for the strategic plan. That was the direction at the work session. So no. All right. Any other questions?
I just wanted to, on behalf of the Communications Committee, Lenny and Sarah, to thank both John and Steve Butner for putting the meetings online. I really appreciate it, and we came to you guys probably just about 2 weeks ago suggesting it, and you guys turned it around very fast, and I really appreciate it, and I know a lot of people in the community have been very thankful because there are lots of people that can't make it here, so I really appreciate both of your efforts.
17 viewers right now.
17?
We're trending in Peru, actually.
All right. Anything else? We have completed our agenda. Is there any objection to adjourning? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.